I'm pleased to be back and in the room, and to those viewing online as well. Thank you for having me. As Larry mentioned, I was here a few years ago. The title of my presentation then was Communications Equipment Price Indexes, A Look Under the Hood. Being the creative geniuses that Larry and I are, we titled this presentation Another Look Under the Hood. So 2020 was 4 years ago, but in many ways, the before times. I remember it was my last trip anywhere before the pandemic, and I looked up a headline from the day of January 24th, 2020. The New York Times had a headline: "As fears of pandemic grow, China puts 20 million on lockdown," and it was they had 25 people that had died at that point. So the world was very different then. Lots changed. So in many different dimensions, and there's also been some changes in what we do. And so what I hope to do today is give a little background on the Producer Price Index, what it is we do, how we do it, and then focus in particular on what we do when we encounter product evolution, because that is of what is most interesting and particularly relevant for the people in your field, where you're looking at valuations. And then we'll look at some of the recent trends and see where things have gone. So for the Producer Price Index, it's a survey that we conduct. We go to businesses and we ask for pricing data. It is a voluntary survey, and there's some few key points here that I want to make, and I'll get to. But I think it's also important to stress what the Producer Price Index is not. It is so it's not a cost of living index. It doesn't view price change from the perspective of consumers. It doesn't include imports. This is strictly about what is produced here, and we do not collect our prices from buyers. So few key things. It's voluntary. The implications of that is that the firms we sample can say no and decline. That has some statistical implications to the extent that the population that declines has different trends from the population that does provide us prices. So we refer to this as non-response bias. So it's something we're mindful of and try to address, but it's not a compulsory requirement to cooperate with us, much to our chagrin sometimes. The prices that we collect are from domestic producers, and this raises some wrinkles sometimes with globalized supply chains, very disaggregated supply chains. What exactly is made here? What qualifies as manufacturing here? So there's a lot of debate in the statistical community about where to draw that line, and I can speak a little bit later to that. But and it's also very relevant for some of the types of equipment that is used in the field here of communications as well. And finally, the Producer Price Index is about output, and so we collect the data that we get from producers of goods and services, and it's not a buyer's index. The PPI, Producer Price Index. Yesterday I was hearing a lot of you guys were throwing all kinds of acronyms. I'll try to be mindful of my own acronyms as well. Producer Price Index has been around for 134 years now. I guess we can update that. It had its origins in the late 1800s as Congress wanted to measure the impact of tariffs on prices, and so that our origins were there, and we've been innovating and doing new things ever since. So this just displays some of those events. It used to be referred to as a wholesale price index. That changed in the late 70s, and we became what's referred to as the producer price index. Nevertheless, you still hear when the producer prices are mentioned on CNBC or other sources, you'll still often hear it referred to as wholesale prices. It's not wrong, it just isn't as complete a picture, I guess, as we would like. And more recently, we've expanded into services industries, construction industries, so we're expanding the scope of what we cover to encompass new areas of the economy. Right now we say about 70% of basically all of mining and manufacturing industries, and about 70% of service industries. What we don't cover are things like non-marketed outputs. So state and local governments, federal governments, those other economic activities that we don't call as marketed output. Some other facts about the producer prices. We define our industries by the North American Industrial Classification System, so that's this NAICS. And those, just like just like in telecommunications, we have to have standards about how we define things. So these are different classifications that we use, and we say we have about 500 producing industries that we generate statistics for. We collect our data on the basis of the industry, and then we publish over 10,000 different indexes. So in the media, you'll hear producer prices went up, and there's some headline number, they say 0.5%, something like that. But in reality, we produce many, many indexes. Some are drawn from our industry data, then they're reaggregated to present a picture of commodities. So in the case of sugar can be, refined sugar can be produced from sugar cane, which is one industry. It can also be produced from sugar beets, which is another producing industry. So the commodities present the data from regardless of any industry that produces it. Our sample of firms, we don't collect prices from every company. We sample companies and that we believe to be representative. We have about 16,000 different companies or sampled firms in our sample, and those businesses provide us with about 60,000 different observations every month. It's a monthly index. Some of the main uses of producer prices, PPIs, there are certainly the macro uses, and those include the Federal Reserve and other policymakers who are looking at the data as a macroeconomic indicator. Some believe it's also a foreshadow of what consumer inflation will be, although the data is a little bit unconvincing about just how well the producer price index will predict consumer prices. The national accountants who calculate the gross domestic product, which was released yesterday and had a very, very favorable number. Those data incorporate producer price indexes because they use our national accountants use our data to deflate nominal domestic product and produce it and reflect it in real terms. So they're using the data to adjust. And the same uses are done on a more micro level as well. So for contract adjustments, parties entering into a contract will use our data to escalate the payments in those contracts according to our measures for inflation. And then there are the valuation uses as well. So the accountants use producer price indexes for LIFO, last in, first out, to essentially devalue inventories on the basis of price inflation. And then, of course, in your field as well, in ad valorem taxation, which is essentially a variant of that. I want to give just an overview of the theoretical underpinnings of the index. And the PPI is a measure of outputs. And what we, just like economists love to make, need to make assumptions in order to make models work. And the assumption that we make here is that in order to isolate the changes in price, we have to hold other things constant. So if you imagine a firm has revenue. That revenue of the firm is dictated by how much they produce, the quantity of their outputs, and that reflects a certain amount of inputs that go into it, labor, capital, technology. We assume all those things are constant, and so when we calculate our index, we are isolating the change in price. So it's only the P here that is allowed to change, the output prices. This gives us a framework for how we approach our index calculation. And so PPI, what we release, what we publish, are not prices. We publish indexes. And those indexes are essentially a sum of weighted averages. And we have to, within our index that we release, incorporates pharmaceutical production. So we have to have a way of weighting pharmaceutical production relative to the production of sporting goods. We do that. We use census data to give us what are here. This is essentially a weighted average, and the base price or the quantities, the outputs, the volume of outputs are held constant in this formula here. So the Q, and what's allowed to change every month is the prices. So that the prices in the current period are compared to prices of the previous period, holding all other things constant here. And here's how it kind of looks in practice. So we have an industry here. This is the industry code is 334210, which refers to telephone apparatus manufacturing. The data here are from the census. The U.S. Census conducts. We know they do they count us. They count the population every 10 years, but every 5 years it conducts an economic census, which gives us our benchmark weights. It tells us how much. We go back to this other formula here. It tells us how much to weight all of the different observations and the different types of product classes that we have. So in this industry here, we have 3 different products that we recognize as part of telephone apparatus. About 85% of it is according to the 2017 economic census, all comes from data communications equipment, some of the switches and routers and so forth. So this tells us how when we compile our indexes, if we have products that are in these categories, it tells us to give a whole lot more weight to the observations that we have for data communications equipment than telephone equipment or carrier line equipment. And this industry in 2017 had outputs about a little over 5 billion. And that, in this industry, there's sort of a related one, but different, is the broadcast and wireless communications equipment. It's a much larger industry, a little over 25 billion, so quite a bit larger. And again, this is a signal to us as we weight our indexes to give a lot more weight to the outputs from this industry than we do for telephone apparatus. And here, most of the weight comes out of this other class here, this other communication systems. It's essentially a residual to catch everything that isn't wireless networking, radio station, or broadcast. And this gives a sense of that. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions. And I should have said this up front. As I'm going along, please feel free to interject, and because I'm going to move on to another topic. I see Larry moving toward a microphone here.
Yeah, a question
Sure.
Um, Never mind.
Okay. We'll get to the question later. I'm going to move on then to how we intervene when we encounter changes in product. And obviously products, all those assumptions that we make that products never change, the quantity produced never change, those are violated all the time. So we have to adjust and make sure that we are maintaining in our index. We want to make sure that our indexes are reflecting not differences in products, but differences in prices. So we refer to this as a constant quality index. So the index movement has to reflect not different products, because it's not fair to compare apples to oranges. We have to intervene and make sure that our basis of comparison is appropriate. And this make sure we're keeping faith with that model that we have that assumes all of the inputs and the technologies and so forth are constant. And in order to do that, we use a number of different methods. The method that we use depends on the information that we have available from the respondent. It also depends on the type of product that we're evaluating and what some of the characteristics are of the differences in the product and the cost to produce those. So I'll go through each of these methods that we use to illustrate how we react when we encounter new goods. The most simple and straightforward method is to directly compare the old product with the new product. This is something that's done when the differences are minor between them. In the case of apparel, maybe one model from seasonal changes from one model of a blouse to another model for a new season don't really change. The inputs don't really change very much. The outputs may not look very different. Maybe it's just a different coloring change or different stitching, something like that. In those cases, we're going to just directly compare the old product with the new product, and the index will reflect whatever difference there is in those cases. So this is where product change is relatively minor. In most cases, though, there is a difference in the cost to produce the product and the product itself. And this reflects then, we assume, to be some kind of quality difference between the two products. And therefore, we can't really just directly compare the old model with the new model. In the case like of an automobile, car makers used to be very regular about putting out new models every October. Now they just sort of come out more irregularly. But you really can't compare the old price of a Honda Civic with a new one, because that new car has new features, new safety elements, new entertainment systems, and so we have to make some adjustments. In these cases, our ideal situation is to get from the companies that are producing it, what is the difference in the cost of production of your old model versus the new model. And that difference in the cost to produce, we then remove from the equation, and so that if there's I have an example here, maybe easier to just kind of illustrate it in this way. If you have a new car, the last model was $20,000, the new model is $21,000. We don't just say that the whole difference is a price change. We dig in and we look at and we ask the respondent, the car maker, what's the difference to produce the new model versus the old one? And well, they tell us, well, $800 of that increase reflects new costs associated with the new features of the vehicle. So that means really what we need to count as a price increase here is the $200 difference. So instead of showing a 5% increase in price, it's just the index will reflect just a 1% price change there. So we're evaluating on the basis of the cost to produce. When we don't have that information, when the respondent isn't able to provide it, then if the products are too dissimilar to compare, then we have to take a different approach. And in this case, we look for a month where we can observe prices for both the old good and the new good, and make a comparison on that basis. And here's an example of that. So in June, our original item here is discontinued. They've stopped producing that item and have replaced it with something else. So from March, April, and May, the index will reflect the price changes for the old model. So in March to April, it went up by 5%. They went back down to the same price they had in April, so that comes out there. But in May, we're able to observe both the old product and the new product, so that in June, the index change will reflect the price change that we observed on the new model between May and June. Fairly straightforward, but this gives us, we refer to this as the overlap, because it allows us to compare using the same time period and maintain consistency there. This method is actually often used for telecom equipment and other products that are often bundles of lots of different components, where it's difficult to make a comparison from one model to the next. Now there is a potential here for bias if we're understating the quality differences between those two things. So this is not our ideal method, but one that sometimes we have to use as a fallback, I guess you'd say. And what we do in other situations, though, are we turn to econometric models and look for, and this is particularly true for products that see rapid technological evolution, and also products that are often, in the case of in computers and microprocessors, very often the per unit cost to produce a new product that has a lot more features, a lot more functionality, so a lot more quality, very often is even cheaper to produce than previous models. So if we were to follow our more traditional method, we would very much be overstating the price increases, because we would ask the respondent, well, what's the difference in cost to produce your new model? And they'll say, well, it actually costs us less. If we use our other method I described a few minutes ago, we would be saying, oh, this new thing is of lower quality because it costs less to produce. But that's obviously not the case, right? These new technology goods are much more robust and have a lot more features, and so it would be incorrect to show price increases as a result of that. So what we do is we turn to econometric modeling, and these models that we use, we refer to them as hedonic regression models. And they're looking at the attributes of the products and creating coefficients for these different attributes. And the explanatory variables are trying to, which are the product features, are used to explain overall price change for the goods. So it's a relationship between these product attributes and price. We use this technique, as I mentioned, for computers, microprocessors, and we've also started using them more recently, probably since my previous visit, for broadband services as well, so internet services. And depending on the good or service, we look at different things. So for computers, the features that we hone in on are the CPU, how much memory does it have, what's the disk space, the size of the monitor. All these various attributes are used in the model that we specify for computers. For microprocessors, we're looking at things like the speed, the cache, how many cores it has, those kind of features. And then for broadband internet service, what's the download speed, who the provider is, and we also see some price differentiation by customer type as well, residential, commercial, so forth. So just to give I won't go into too much of the math here, but this is how we specify sort of a generic model, particularly for computers, where we have these B values here are implicit prices. These are the coefficients that we use to explain derive the overall price for the good. And the X values here are the different types of characteristics of the product. So the speed of the processors, the cores, all that are used to explain the dependent variable here, which is the price. And I want to this here will illustrates too that we depending on the product, we also use different models depending on the type of the product. So for microprocessors, we introduced this, and this is a new model, relatively new model for us, based on some research that we've done and had some good peer review comments on it. Introduces a dummy variable here for time periods. So we look at this term here reflects that we're looking at two different or time periods rather, and this gives us ability to compare between one period and the next, and has in the broadband and the microprocessors are also in log form. So this is to reflect different levels of. In one case, we're looking at explicit values for those characteristics in the price for computers, but for microprocessors and broadband, we're looking at these things in percentage terms. The overall takeaway here really is we put a lot of thought into how to specify our models depending on the products, and that's really what I want to stress here from this slide. And for those who are interested in more of the detail and the explanation for how these models were chosen, we have this information on our website, and I'm certainly happy to point in that direction. One of the things that wasn't mentioned there on this list are telecom equipment. So I thought I should ask the question, well, what about telecom equipment? We've looked at this and have found some of our BLS staff, Alex Clayman here was one of the authors of this paper that used cross-validation techniques to compare different methodologies, different methods for imputing price change for telecom equipment. They compared using hedonic methods that we saw before on the previous slide, where we're looking at the attributes of the products and so forth, comparing that with more of the traditional methods that we use to impute prices. And their finding really was that there was no advantage to using hedonic techniques here, that using our traditional methods were actually superior to using hedonics. If we're missing a value here in this case, we're imputing the value based on similar products. And that's what their finding was that our traditional imputation methods were better. So we did not introduce a hedonic model for telecom equipment. The products were also, in the case of computers and microprocessors, they're all very fairly homogeneous type of products. Telecom really is the product, they're very heterogeneous types of products, so they don't fit models very well. And that was one of the findings here from that. And we can get back to that too. I'm sure there might be some more questions on that. But I wanted to show just a view of what trends we've seen over the last 10 years here. In this top red line here reflects all PPI final demands. It's a very aggregate number. That's the one you hear on the news. The PPI went up, the PPI went down. That's this top line. So you can see all of and this is from 2013 up till our most recent data that was released for December. The indexes below that are all indexes for which we perform some kind of adjustment. So the telephone and wireline data equipment, you can see what was significantly lower in terms of the price increases. Were lower, and then the indexes that went down the most were the microcircuits and electronic computers. You saw during the pandemic here, we saw computers go up quite a bit. This reflects, I think, some of the supply chain issues. Computers have a lot of different components, so they were very vulnerable to the supply chain disruptions. Microprocessors saw a little bit of an increase, but wasn't quite as much, even though we were hearing about all the chip shortages and everything. That did reflect in some of these increases here. But more recently, you see that the microprocessors have begun. They're more of a downward trend in the last year or so. Microprocessors also don't have as many components as the computers, so maybe not as vulnerable to the supply chain disruptions.
Hey, Vince.
Yes.
A question.
Sure.
Now, in our line of work, we've also found other studies in addition to BLS to take a look at the communications equipment, and one of them that I use in my line of work is the Federal Reserve data, and that shows a deflationary pressure on a lot of that communications equipment. I'm wondering if are you familiar with that study, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think we've worked with some of the authors of that approach from the Federal Reserve, Dave Byrne and Dan Olisher. They take a different approach, and some of the differences there are in terms of for us when we looked at what they did, we could not operationalize what they were doing. That's one thing. Where our index, we have to come out every month. So there was timing issues with they're looking at data over a little bit of a longer period of time. And methodologically, there were some differences in what they were willing to include in their scope that we weren't in PPI. But yeah, I am familiar with what they've done for their industrial production, and my understanding, I asked staff about this recently, but that some of their declines have sort of softened as well a little bit. But they definitely, if we were to have their line up here, their line would be probably much more show more of a drop.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we are. I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, I will move on then. So this is a conference about the future and technology futures. I thought it'd be appropriate to look at what some of the things that we're looking at and for how we do what we do and how it might be changing. We are certainly looking at artificial intelligence, statistical learning, machine learning techniques. We're using some now. Some of those models that I mentioned involve using statistical learning techniques to help us specify the models that we use, to help us choose which variables we should include in the models. That's been ongoing. We're also looking at doing more research in small sample techniques. Sometimes our sample sizes are very small. We don't have a lot of domestic producers of products X, Y, and Z. We have to use more mathematical techniques to compare what's in sample and what's out. That is a field of some ongoing interest as well. And then we're also confronted with the reality that doing survey work is becoming harder and harder, that it's tougher to get into companies, to go out and get them to voluntarily submit data to the government. We have staff around the country, economists that are in regions throughout the country, and they are used to going into a workplace, finding somebody there to talk to. That's getting harder to do with the work being performed from home or other places. So we're looking to leverage other data sources. So we're looking at big data. We have data. There's a lot of companies that do data aggregation out there as a supplement to what we do, not necessarily as a replacement. But for producer prices, it's difficult. There's often not a lot of big data sets out there that have all the information we need. On the consumer side, the consumer price index is able to go into these retailers and they have massive data bases that are of hundreds of millions of transactions, and they can get really good results from those data sources. For producer prices, for more business-to-business type of transactions, it's a little bit tougher. But we're looking and we're really trying very hard to leverage other data sources because our traditional data collection model really is becoming harder and harder for us to use. And so just a few final thoughts. The measuring price change for these high-tech goods is always going to be a challenge for us. Anytime there's a rapid product evolution is a challenge for measuring the price changes. But we're always on the lookout for new methods. We benefit certainly from external input from our respondents, from other academics, even from other countries. We share a lot of best practices around the world. Often we're exchanging what we do, but we also learn quite a bit from other countries and how they're approaching different issues. And so those exchanges are really important for us, and we're very transparent with our methodologies. They're on the website that we have. If you can find them, I will confess our website is, I struggle sometimes finding what I need to look for on my own website, but it's all there, and sometimes I have to ask for help. But there's a lot of disclosure about what exactly we do and how we do it. So I will end there, and hope there's lots of questions.
All right, I can grab this one.
All right. Go ahead,
Okay, so what I'm seeing is a very linear process where you're bringing in data from the manufacturers, processing it, and then it puts out. But is there ever a feedback loop where after you have processed the data, you go back and say, this is what we're thinking about? So you get input in the process, or is it strictly a linear system?
So are we going back to the data providers and
Yes.
saying, is this an accurate representation of what we're reflecting?
Yes.
So, yes, on our, it used to be a paper form, but now it's an internet-based data collection instrument. We do show what they previously reported to us, and we show, if we've made adjustments, we show those as well. So the respondents can see what they've sent to us and what we're using, and in that way there's feedbacks. And really what that's there for is as a prompt for them to revise perhaps data that they previously reported to us. If they see, and this happens, so the producer prices are revised after we have a 4-month revision window. So this month, we're in January, we released a December number, but we also issued a final number for September or October, whatever it was. And that final number, that revised number, reflects new inputs that we received from producers. Sometimes it was just they were late. Other times they revised something they previously reported because they have more transactions to include, or sometimes when we hit them on the wrong time of the month, they haven't run all of their queries or reports yet, and there's updates that are made on because of that. In terms of methodology, bigger picture, do we go back to the industries and ask, are we getting this right? We do when we're beginning coverage of a new industry. We go to them and we ask, what are the things that drive price change for your industry? And because we want to make sure we capture those attributes in how we describe their product. So we send them a request to send us a price every month, and we describe the product. If there's a model number or if there's a customer type, we want to make sure that all those variables that contribute to price are identified, so that if one of those characteristics changes, again, it's a prompt to the respondent to say, oh, I gave you a price last month to this class of customer. This month I'm giving you a price that reflects a different class of customer. We can't directly compare those. We have to make some intervention and change. So in that way, we do go to the industries, and when we sample, and make sure that we're understanding what drives the changes for them.
And one more quick question.
Yeah.
I know in unemployment, there's always a seasonal component. There's an adjustment. You know, I come out of the world of ARIMA modeling and looking at
Yeah.
So do you have a seasonal component in your formula, or is the presumption that this is a more constant?
So we do seasonal adjustment. We don't do it at the observation level, though. We perform our seasonal adjustment at the index level. So what we do every year, in fact, just last week, I attended our annual seasonal adjustment expo thing that we do, and we run these X12 ARIMA thing. I don't do it myself, but we have people who do, and they look at all those 10,000 indexes that we generate, and they look to see what indexes have seasonal patterns over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And if they see that indexes have this a seasonal pattern, then they do apply a seasonal adjustment factor to those. So yes, we do seasonal adjustment, but not at the individual observation level, but at an aggregate
Thank you.
level.
I have a few questions, but first, does anybody else?
Steve might
Yeah,
have.
Larry, I got one in the back of the room here.
One online. Okay, very good.
Quick question for you since you last were here. I mean, maybe a follow-on to Augie's question about adjustments. Can you give us your observations on how COVID impacted and some of the supply chain and some of the other things? And were there any adjustments that were made, or how do you look at normalizing if that's a factor?
So things like supply chain disruptions, we have to show that. That's inflation. Right? That's not a difference in the price or anything. That is exactly what we need to be showing in the index. So when there were those supply chain shortages, and those were reflected in quite higher prices from commodity inputs on steel and plastics, and it really, you could see it just going through the system, and sometimes very suddenly. They were difficult to predict. You didn't know where they were going to show up. So those price changes that we saw that were reported to us were reflected in the index, and that's why you saw consumer prices and producer prices shoot up as much as they did, because we don't adjust that stuff out, because that's truly inflation. So those have I think the data over the last few months and the last year really have shown that some of that has started to work out. There was that term thrown around a few years ago by Treasury officials that, don't worry, this is transitory inflation. And that bothered a lot of people because they were paying all kinds of money for groceries and gas and so forth. And but maybe there was something to it. Depending on how you want to view the time period for the transitory nature of it, I think we are starting to see that it really was a temporary effect. It was severe. It had consequences for people, and we're not seeing the prices come down. And we're not seeing disinflation, or we're not seeing deflation here. The price levels aren't going back to what we paid a few years ago, but what we're seeing is the level of increase go back to more of a normal level. So it's a disinflation, not a deflation, and there's a big difference there. But I think we're also looking out for. We may not be done. There's a lot of issues. Anything that affects the flow of commerce can have a big effect on prices that we see. So right now we've been hearing a lot about in the Red Sea the effect of the fighting there on shipping through the Suez Canal. That's certainly a point of interest. But I think more long-term, something like what's happening in Panama, in the Panama Canal, where it's an environmental thing. There's not enough water to operate the locks there, or to operate them at the capacity that they were able to. So you have ships lining up. That all has that we see that. We see that in industries as they're not able to get their inputs. It slows down production. Those kind of things have a big relevance on what we see.
Karen from Orange County says, is documentation provided by the companies that support the information they give, or is it just a survey type process? And if there's no documentation, how is what the company provides verified?
So part of our bargain with our data providers is that we say the data you provide to us is confidential. So we don't release who provides us the data. That is part of it's a long-standing statistical tradition, I guess, in the U.S., many other countries as well, that in order to get cooperation, they have to know that we're safeguarding their data. So we don't document who provides us the data. In fact, we often have problems disclosing data because for some products, there's so few producers that if we were to release a price index for something at a very detailed level, if there's only one or two producers of that type of product in the U.S., we may have to not mask that series and publish the data only at a more aggregate level. So we take great care not to publish or release who provides us the data. What we do make available are the methodologies that we use and the techniques that we use to generate our data. I think, is that sort of what the question was there about? Okay. Happy to follow up, but I think that's if I understood correctly, I think that's what she was asking.
Any more online? Okay. I have a couple questions for you. As I understand it, what you're tracking, the BLS indexes are the price that producers are offering their goods at. And but that's just domestic producers. If we're looking at it from the companies that are in the communications industry of providing service, they're paying prices for both domestic and foreign producers. So we're not really measuring what they're paying, you're measuring what they're paying for domestic producers.
Yes.
Only. And so do you have some idea about what percentage in various telecom sectors and computers, for example, are domestic versus
Yeah, we do have the issue there. We do have import price indexes as well. We do track the BLS in a different program does track those. The issue there is that the data are often available only at a much more highly aggregated level. So in contrast to us, where we might have had, if I go back to something like this here, the data available on for our imports may be only available at this broadcast and wireless level, whereas and so it's kind of hard to tell to disaggregate that and find data at a more detailed level about price trends for wireless networking equipment, which is one reason why these numbers are as, frankly, probably as low as they are is because a lot of this is probably imports. But the data that we have for imports typically are less detailed, and so we tend to see the data that they release, their sample sizes are smaller, and so they aren't able to meet the disclosure requirements that we have to be able to give us data at those lower levels.
Going back to, for example, computers, which actually is a pretty big input to the communications industry, and with virtualization is becoming more and more so. Again, going back to the fact that a lot of providers of computer equipment are foreign as opposed to domestic, would that sort of bias y'all's index to the higher end type of equipment, supercomputers, for example, that do tend to be produced here versus the mass market servers that tend to get used on the internet?
Yes, so I think you're right. There's a difference in the type of units that are produced here, higher end, a lot more server type of equipment than consumer. We do produce data on laptops or portables, and we still have a desktop and servers. We have a model for servers as well. So we do have under computers. It's not here on this line. This computers here includes all those servers, portables, desktop, and so the servers are quite significant in the U.S. Those are all included here. So yes, to the extent that the types of products that are produced in the U.S., which tend to be higher end, more sophisticated type products, where it's the economics just work out better for domestic production than mass production of consumer goods. There is that difference that you're saying there, the potential for that the types of things that are produced here are perhaps different from the bundle of goods that you would import from lower cost production countries.
And then I noticed that Internet Access Services is the only service that's on there. So that is the service that so it's the price that consumers are paying for Internet access.
It's the prices that producers are receiving from their customers for providing the broadband internet.
Presumably, since Internet access, that's going to be all domestic providers.
Yes.
We're not going to have foreign providers for that. Okay.
That's right. Yeah,
Well-
that reflects domestic service.
Well,
I thought it was
so-
interesting to
so-
add that on here.
So the industry that's represented here for the price that these guys are charging is the one that has the downward trend even through the pandemic.
Yes.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Since even through the pandemic, up a little bit with everything else, but
Input prices appear to be increasing, their output price is declining.
yeah, I guess
Okay.
you could say that.
Any other
Right.
questions?
If-
Okay,
To the
well-
extent that computers, circuits here, yeah,
Okay, I have two more questions. One, do you guys do any forecasting, or is it strictly,
we do not do forecasting, so we are not in competition with you on that. We are strictly a rear view mirror. All right? We observe only what has happened, and we do not, we strenuously avoid making predictive statements. So it's strictly looking at what has happened. It's not to say that we don't internally look at where things are going, and I certainly, that's my joy of coming here too, is to see where things are heading, so we can anticipate and understand what to expect. But in terms of our data and what we release, it's all historic. It's not predictive at all. The only part of labor statistics that does look ahead a little bit is our outlook for our occupational handbook, which does project. That's when you hear, oh, we're going to need so many phlebotomists in 2030. That's where that's coming from. Is that
Excellent.
end? But we don't predict.
we have one more minute, so I have one more question, but if anybody else has a question, I'll give it to them. We have an online question?
Karen asks, how does PPI confirm that what they are provided is accurate, and are there any checks and balances?
Yeah, fair. We do look at other, in the case of commodities, we look at other sources. We look at other sort of non-official sources of data. But in many ways, we have to trust our process too, that our respondents are giving us accurate data. There are times where we look and we wonder about what's being reported, and we follow up with the respondents. Our analysts will go back if they have an observation that seems way out of character for what else has been reported for that time period, or what this company has reported to us previously. We call the company and ask what's going on here, and not to challenge what they're doing, but to understand it. And those conversations are invaluable for us because it really puts texture and helps us explain what we're showing. And by and large, people are reporting to us genuine activity, genuine transactions. And so we don't really doubt really what's being reported to us. I think where we have to be aware and sensitive and mindful of what we're doing is, are our methodologies keeping up? Are we that response bias that I spoke about before, to make sure that what we're presenting is representative, that the sample that we selected is representative of the whole that we're trying to reflect. Those are where we really have to be careful about the quality of our data, and making sure that we don't collect prices from every company in the country. We have to take a sample, and that we just have resources to do that. So we have to make sure that sample is very representative.
Just clarification, how many members of your team are on PPI?
Yeah. Just to give that background, we have in our national office in Washington, we have probably about 120 people, and maybe half of those are what we would call our analysts, and we organize ourselves along subject matter areas. So I oversee a section that handles durable goods manufacturing. I have 3 teams that each focus on a different aspect of durable goods. mining, electronics, transportation equipment, and so forth. But then we also have a lot of methodological people who help us with the aggregation of our data. So my staff and I, we focus on the microdata, making sure the observations are validated and get fed into the calculation. And then there's another set of people who work on the calculations, the seasonal adjustment factors, making sure that we're understanding and presenting to the public a useful set of information. So we have public information people. So that's just in the national office, about 120 people. And then there's probably maybe another 60 or 70 data collectors that are out throughout the country who go out and initiate the cooperation with our respondents and select unique items to follow in our market basket. Those are our regional staff, and we are always working with them to make sure that we're helping them understand. They go out, they're generalists. They can go to a telecom provider one day and a bowling alley the next. So they do everything. And so we make sure that they have the awareness of what types of attributes they should be collecting. And once they collect the data, once they initiate a respondent, as we say, then the relationship with the respondent is managed after that point from the national office and the staff that I oversee.
Very good.
Yeah, and that's just producer prices. Then there's a whole other, consumer prices is probably another couple hundred people.
Cool. Well, we're a little bit over time, so
Okay.
we'll save questions for break. Thank you so much, Vincent, for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.